Okay, if you don't get it, it's that simple. All right. Apollo, you become too studious. Here's the Apollonian kitty. All right. The same overly studious person can be the same overly Dionysiac person, just as you can have Dionysian kitty, right? Dionysian kitty is just a little ball and kitty. He's having a great time right there. Just had to find a way to sneak a little kitty picture in. Okay, that's how I cope with the fact that so few read the syllabus. Okay, so Fight Club. It's, if anything, a Apollonian Dionysian distinction at play. Ski says this again and again and again. Fight Club is the Apollonian Dionysian distinction, right? As a matter of fact, if you take a close-up at the card that Tyler Durden gives out, the symbol in the image is a ancient Greek representation, cherubic representation, but ancient representation of the dueling faces, dueling cherub childs. So opposite sides of the same coin, which is what the Greeks thought human identity was. We are all held together by two sort of mirror forces, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. And so you have Tyler Durden and the narrator. You know, Jack he's only referred to as Jack once, but or twice if I recall. But for the most part, they are presented as, in the movie, as separate and distinct and autonomous ones. And we can figure out which ones are which really early on, right? This is the rational one that lives by order. How many pens, right? All the books, and look, 3 pens, all right? Everything laid out, everything is stacked up, everything, all the binders, there's the right, the sort of, you know, the man in the gray final suit, and, excuse me. And then you have Dionysus, right? Just bloody, beaten, pulp, cigarette chain, smoking, beer. There's always a beer in his hand. He's always drunk and god of wine. He always, whether he's sitting down, right, always has beer in his hand, or some wine, or some sort of drunken revelry to an extreme. Okay, so remember that according to Nietzsche, when these forces are out of balance, one will come out stronger than the other as an attempt to correct the imbalance. And this is really dangerous. This is really unhealthy, because what can happen is, if you've gone to the extreme where you've cut yourself off, you fall prey to the possibility that you can go to the extreme to restore the imbalance, right? And that's the idea here. So he says, you were looking for a way to change your life. You couldn't do this on your own. All the ways you wish you could be, that's me, Tyler Durden. So they go on this frenzy, right? They start taking bats to stuff. They form a fight club, right? He's always getting drunk. He's now rolling up his sleeves. And all the ways that he could not self-actualize, Tyler Durden comes in and plays the character to restore the imbalance. Notice that this is like a Gucci out here, and then so these are the phrases, right? I am Jack's wasted life. I am Jack's inflamed sense of rejection. I am Jack's broken heart. I am Jack's complete lack of surprise, because in the modern age, nothing is really surprising. Everything is pre-patterned, regularity, conformist, some pre-packaged emotions, peak experiences, right? If you on travel sites, you can purchase experiences, right? You can purchase being led to the top of Mount Everest. You can purchase a parasailing trip that will guarantee, and the descriptions of those experiences, right? Experience thrill and exhilaration as you climb and soar above 10,000 feet, or and then just click for the incredible low Groupon price of $7.99. That's a complete lack of surprise. Even surprise can be purchased, right? Especially today. This is commodity fetishes, right? You can purchase surprise for a certain type of price. So Tyler Durden is an attempt to restore that imbalance. Now, the crucial scene is when we realize that they are two sides of the what? Same coin. It's the Apollonian Dionysian distinction, but where the big problem is personal identity. It's one person whose identity is in crisis because it is fragmented and split off. Now, in this sense, Tyler Durden comes in to restore the imbalance because of the fragmentation of modern living. He says, why would anyone possibly confuse you with me? No, right? He's like, you've got it. All the ways you wish you could be me, that's me, right? All the ways that you wish you could, all the ways you wish that you could give voice to those sublimated, repressed feelings, desires, predilections, irrational proclivities to sometimes just go around and just, break some stuff or dance or get drunk or sleep with Marla or all the things that he does. He says, that's me. And most importantly, this is crucial, I am free. This is a question of freedom, existential freedom. I am free the ways that you are not. On this view, the character of Tyler Durden performs a function to restore Dionysian balance to the imbalanced relation of Apollonian existence, where Apollonian existence is not really even truly Apollonian existence. So a true Apollonian would be a really creative scholar, right? A really creative scholar that's always giving form to their thoughts, but it's creative. Can get a little crazy sometimes and will go down any avenue in passionate search for their, the cure for their, whatever it is. But the type of existence that the narrator is living is there is no creativity in his job. There is no creativity. As a matter of fact, what does he say is the content of his job? Formulas, right? There is a formula for risk analysis and risk management. He just plugs in the numbers for risk management and recall. He's a recall coordinator. And what does he say? He figures out what's going to cost more to recall something, right? What is the instrumental rationality? The modern tools of reason is it cost effective, right? Is it cost effective? That is the extent of his creativity. He's not free even in the Apollonian sense. He's just in this sense enslaved to pattern regularity in a way that he can't take a stand on his existence, which causes him great anxiety. So this is the releasing of the Dionysian drive as a corrective to that force. Okay. But most importantly, Fight Club is a testament to the modern fragmentation, on Skeeze's account, of Apollo and Dionysus as the same aspects or two sides of the same coin. The Apollonian Dionysian fragmentation, you see it all the time, in which first and foremost they're split and separate and apart, right? They're individual characters. Even though we know later on it's revealed to us that they're two sides of the same coin, you are cut off and you are fragmented, right? You're fragmented. You may want to be the same person, but they're absolutely cut off from each other. And so the first thing that is represented is the modern problem that living fragments us and cuts us off, and we have to be either or at the appropriate time. Even at those times, we're not ourselves. We're not fully Apollonian in school because we take classes that are pre-patterned, pre-packaged for us for our major that fulfill general education requirements. If I were to say, why did you take this class? Many of you would say, because it fit my schedule. That ought to disturb us deeply. It probably does not, and so we will go on to the next slide. All right, so the third concept that Nietzsche introduces is very, very familiar to rebellious sort of youth until the rebellion is sort of beaten out of them by the need for health benefits and insurance and jobs and things like that. So according to Nietzsche, the question of personal identity, taking a stand, is a very serious one. Like, one must become who one is. But to do that, how do you begin this whole process? Well, the first thing to do is to recognize that there's a problem, right? To recognize that there's a fragmentation of the whole individual, and that restoring balance to that sense of fragmentation where we have to be either or, really, really good students, and then we're made to feel awful if we get a B on the test, or vice versa, that you feel like you'll never be a good student if you've already been written off as either the jock or the whatever it is. But the first thing to do is to name the problem as such, right? To name the problem. And for Nietzsche, the problem is, in many ways, that the values that are held up before us as the dominant values, the right way to do it, the right values or the wrong way, are just that. They're cultural values that are held uncritically. Which is to say, what Nietzsche's not saying, remember, Nietzsche's not amoral. He's not saying don't have values. So a cultural value can be based on respect for the law, where the law includes things like it is illegal to murder somebody, right? Except in case we're justified by a government in terms of war, or in terms, I mean, there's all sorts of rational ways out of this, sort of loose issue. But what Nietzsche's not saying is there are no values worth having. He's just saying if it is a case that the values that you choose to formulate your identity are prepackaged, pre-patterned, ready-made, unquestioned values, those are not your values, which is not to say that you can take up a value, question it, completely reject it, and if you come back to it, say, I really do think that value is exactly what after having questioned it and rejected it, right? As having being able to formulate strong arguments against it, you can still say that that's your value, and that's perfectly okay for Nietzsche. He has a famous line that says the temple must be rebuilt if it is to be, the temple must be destroyed if it is to be rebuilt anew. If it is to stand on solid ground, you have to, it's a very Cartesian sense too, but you have to be able to reevaluate, question, and raise your values, not because they exist in themselves, but because they are in many ways otherworldly values. And by otherworldly values, Nietzsche means that a lot of times those values have hidden values in themselves. This is a concept of the value of a value. So according to Nietzsche, cultural values tend to have values behind them. Let me repeat that. According to Nietzsche, cultural values tend to have values behind them. So it's not that there's a right way or a wrong way in and of themselves, but that quote-unquote right way or that quote-unquote wrong way has in itself serves another value. And here you can replace the word value for function. It has another function in society. Holding a certain value, like getting an education, right? Holding steady employment, has a value in culture. It serves a function. Reason it out, kids. What function might that serve? Well, you have a well-integrated sort of labor pool that can act and behave predictably, reasonably predictably, and on the basis of which you can formulate sort of economic laws and principles about consumer behavior. You can produce goods, you can manufacture goods, you can create goods, you can respond to the quote-unquote market. If there is a quote-unquote pool of consumers whose behaviors can be rationally predicted to a generalized extent, right? To the degree that it is sort of generally possible. If one did not have jobs to produce an income, to be able to have discretionary income to purchase certain needs, or discretionary income to purchase certain wants versus certain needs. If you didn't create those categories in the meantime, then the whole would sort of fall apart, right? The whole system would not work. And so it's very, very important that we then institute cultural values like going to college, right, as the right way, and being a hopeless bum as the wrong way. Now, is it possible that somebody that you encounter on the street that never went to college has greater sort of deductive and inductive reasoning skills, that is critically sort of attentive and attuned to understanding the way in which people talk and unpacking their claims, maybe not in a formally logical way. But is it possible that that can be more than somebody that went through college, but college never went through them, so to speak? Sure, it's possible. We can see how somebody can be more sort of intellectually apperceptive, or have greater acumen, or just be brighter in that sense. But certainly culture is not going to look kindly upon that, right? Culture is not going to approve of those ways. That may not be seen as the right way. So, so for Nietzsche, one must begin to reevaluate the values of culture by asking what function they serve in terms of the larger whole. In other words, it's an actual method. It's a method. It's like a step by step for integrating, or rather reintegrating, the now fragmented, alienated, and modern self. The self that is just kind of a machine that has to become somebody through the appropriate mechanisms and institutional protocols of, standardized education and globalized industry. Now, Nietzsche is going to, based on this idea, reject any justification for one's beliefs based on social conventions. Anything that's popular, right? Anything that's the right way or the wrong way to do things based on popular convention is going to be rejected. He's going to say that's just not an authentic way. That's not yourself. That's just a self that you picked up. That's the Che Guevara T-shirt. That's just an identity that you picked up in a catalog. That is a catalog ready-made purchased identity. And so that's not going to yield a true self, or that's not going to answer the question of human identity or giving meaning to your identity whatsoever. Now, the whole project of reevaluating values, right? Saying, okay, which values have I inherited from my culture, and what function do they in themselves produce in culture? And as such, are they the kinds of values that I want to hold up, right? Do I want to get a college degree in this particular field, in a technical discipline? A friend of mine was online, and they came across some dating profile, or they brought it in. It was quite hilarious, where somebody put down that they wanted to make sure that no one responded to their ad if they held any non-marketable degree, such as art, poetry, philosophy, or something like that, right? No one with a non-marketable degree would be, in principle, of interest to me, right? Now, this is just the height of Nietzsche. Would just be appalled. That is not somebody that's going to become a self on Nietzsche's view. Because they're already in advance foreclosing possibilities based on the ability or inability, in this case, of a potential suitor or match to fit the ready-made profile of somebody with a marketable degree, right? As if that quote-unquote right way, right? That marketability has already been seen as a right way to become a somebody, and that somebody wants to meet a match that is another right way. That's just further self-alienation. So for Nietzsche, you have to be able to reevaluate those values or function in society, and whether or not they can and yield sort of important sources of meaning for your life. And if not, then you're going to have to do two things. The first thing you're going to have to do is reject them. You're going to have to take a stand. You're going to have to do something, right? If the job you have and have had, and of course this is all in light of, you have to take into account, as Sartre would say, responsibility, right? You have to take account that if you have a job that you hate, but you have dependents, children, for example, and if you just want to quit your job, right, then you're choosing to do so, and you value something more than one particular value. But you have to reject them. You have to give, sort of flip the finger to those values, and you have to take a stand. Why? Because what does the existentialist believe in? The here and now. It's the only metaphysics that matters, right? The here and now. If you can't act upon it, then it's, why would you have a method for something to begin with? Otherwise, it just stays at the level of epistemology or theory of knowledge. Knowing that this exists, it has no meaning. It's completely devoid of significance for an existentialist. You have to take a stand on that knowledge. If you realize that going to college or having the job that you currently have fulfills a function, that you're on this sort of degree towards an arts degree or a marketable degree, whatever it be, and you realize that the larger function that that serves is one that does not speak to you for particular reasons and doesn't in any way contribute to your sense of fulfillment and passion, if it is not the thing that you cannot not do, that you will fight, cheat, steal, lie, whatever it is that you, in order to fulfill, then according to Nietzsche, you have to take a stand or act upon it. You have to reject it. You've got to quit the job, right? The narrator certainly will do this. You have to take a stand in order to self-actualize. You must become who you are. You have to take a stand. You have to act. This is where Sartre gets this, right? You have to take a stand on the self-actualization in the here and now to become who you are. Now, two things to remember about the method for doing this. First of all, you can't be a split, divided, or fragmented self, right? And the reason for that is if you take a stand, while being a fragmented self, you're going to do it on the basis of the competing drives and compensating for the current drive that's not getting fed. Okay, what do we mean by that, right? If Apollo and Dionysus are getting cut off, right? If you're going to work and kind of like the narrator and just having to answer, you're constantly belittled, you have no creativity, no freedom of choice, no freedom, not just freedom of choice, but negative freedom as well. If all that is cut off and you have, every time you try to say something creative or partake in input or try to think outside the box, you're constantly, you have to sort of walk and talk in lockstep, then the sort of Dionysian instincts and drives are going to be welling up and welling up. And how is it that you're going to leave? You're going to leave in a bloody fight. You're going to say, I quit. I like take the stuff and shove it type of mentality, which may not be the best way to go. In other words, you may be making a wrong decision. You may not be able to see ways in which creativity is lurking in your job in ways that you couldn't have otherwise seen because you're so repressed, right? If you're fragmented self, your actions will always be skewed on the basis of the drive, Apollonian or Dionysian, that's not getting articulated or fed or that's not integrated into your identity. So that's the first thing to remember. And the second is that Nietzsche's going to further develop this concept by saying that in order to act or take a stand upon these values that you have reevaluated, you're going to have to undergo what he'll call the three metamorphoses of the spirit. So, because it's not going to be enough to just reject the values. Let's say there's a value, you reject those values, then what? Well, you can go back and say, well, that one I liked a lot, right? For reasons that I now have greater clarity. So you can still become a doctor, but maybe you'll say, I'm not going to become a doctor in sort of cosmetic surgery as I had originally planned, because that's not going to be fulfilling. That's a market-driven sort of, I'm not saying it is, but, well, okay, it is. That instead of being a cosmetic surgeon, not for reconstructive purposes, for, breast implants for women that have undergone cancer or breast cancer double mastectomies, but for those reasons, instead of that, I'm going to still choose to pursue medicine passionately, but I'm going to go into Doctors Without Borders or whatever it be, right? You can reevaluate them and still choose the original option, the original right way, but in a way that you have what? Reevaluated the value. You have reevaluated the function of that value in culture and can now take it up as your own so that it yields a creative doctor, an actual person whose identity is not just this doctor, this businessman, but a sort of a genuine, creative, whole individual whose job just happened to be a partial descriptor of who they are, alongside what they've loved, what they've stood for, who they cared for, what they helped, the hours they spent, quietly with friends, and all of those things. And if not, then you're going to have to start a really, really difficult thing, which is trying to create new values. And that's so difficult, right? That is, we're actually going to hold off on talking about that until American Beauty, but that will be the sort of larger challenge, the most difficult thing of all. But we're going to have to undergo the three metamorphoses of the spirit. So the reevaluation of values is everywhere in Fight Club. Let's take a look. Okay, so the first thing is that you reject the herd-like conventional values. So just because it's a values, you just you reject it, right? As a matter of fact, consumerism, this is the way in which consumerism, according to Maurice Key, shows up in the film, right? He says, look, did you know that you're really being sold this story in order to purchase more goods? Let me just tell you. And we see Tyler Durden sneaking in sort of pornographic images into everyday conventional values. He's somebody that conventional society would absolutely abhor, right? He's not the degreed lawyer or the well-practiced doctor. So there's a rejection of conventional values. And because the narrator lives such a patterned, regular existence, an IKEA boy life, what tends to compensate is the Dionysian mischief and mayhem. Dionysus for the Greeks, when he's not with Apollo, is pure mischief and mayhem. Pure mischief and mayhem. And of course, mayhem here can be fun frivolity, right? Look at those kids causing mayhem, right, at the skate park. But as we'll see in a moment, mayhem can have its darker sides too if it's unrestrained. So they go into, they show the irrationality of a rational system. How? They use fat, right? They break into like liposuction. They use fat and sell it back to people that are trying not to be fat. So they expose the irrationality of rational system through this mischievous ways, right? And so this is largely unbeknownst to the narrator because he has a split personality. He can't even recall that he's the one that's doing this, right? He sees himself as two different people, but the narrator, right, the voice, the superego, the consciousness, actually has to be split off from the narrator at hand. We see the mischief, right, in this splitting scene. And so the smiley face is actually really telling because what's the smiley face representative of what human emotion? Right? What's that emoticon of? Happiness. Happiness. Yes, you can be happiness, but lurking in the depths of those eyes, there's a fire that rages beneath of that simplified, manufactured, one-dimensional happiness, right? So the smiley face has to become in many ways the, not the motto, but the logo of Project Mayhem. Notice, of course, the notion of project. The project as a collective thing starts to go awry because it's not it's a collective experience. And anytime you have a collective experience like a project for all, what gets lost? The individual, right? The individual. And what's existentialism based on? The individual. So we know that some things are going to have to go awry in Project Mayhem. We also see this in one of the key scenes, the way in which the characters reject conventional values. The narrator says, we're, consumers. We're all we're byproducts of a lifestyle obsession, right? A lifestyle meaning the pre-packaged, pre-patterned, ready-made identity that you just have to buy the right outfit for. So he says, oh, fuck off with your sofa units. That's the IKEA, right? I say never be complete, right? There's an incompleteness. That's the Dionysian. I say stop being perfect, where perfection, by the way, is to be fragmented, right? And so the problem with that is that he says, well, you did lose a lot of versatile solutions for what? What kind of living? Modern living. It's a critique of modernity, right? It's a critique of modernity. Why? Because the things you own end up owning you. This is not the segue. So the critique is there's a lot of easy, rational solutions for modern living, right? Things that make us feel as if all is well or we have higher, better standards of living, but deep down, that's not you. It's the things that you think make you you. There are now stand-ins. Okay. Now, under the existentialist view, it's not enough to know this. Knowing this does very little. You got to take a stand. You have to do something. And this is the example of Raymond Hess. He says, Raymond, you're going to die. Why? Because we're beings towards death. That is the existentialist sort of position. And he says, look, what did you want to be, right? Before you got stuck in this consumer sort of consumer driven choices, and the guy is just like a clerk, a grocery clerk. This is what he has to tend this store. He has to make money in order to probably feed his family or feed himself or pay his rent or have coins for him to do his laundry or very simple things. And he says he wanted to be a veterinarian. And the question, you're going to die, so would you rather be dead, right? He says, if you're not on your way to becoming a veterinarian in 6 weeks, you will be dead. So he sort of threatens him in this violent way to say, you must take a stand on your life. What was your passion? What did you hearken for before you sort of surrender to the patterned regularity of pre-made, pre-packaged consumer identities of mass culture, which in itself is not bad. You can, but it deadens or levels everybody to the same options. And then he says, tomorrow will be the most beautiful day of Raymond Hess's life. Why? Because he has woken up to his existential concern or his existential dilemma that he is this canvas on which the artwork of the unfolding of his life will happen, and that he has a primary role in being an artist in the making of that life. Rather than somebody else painting your image, you have to paint your own image. And that's really hard. It's a very hard thing to do. So right here, he's once again reiterating the existential notion of realizing or becoming who you are. Okay, and the fourth and last concept here that Nietzsche introduces, this one he introduces in his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And this is the concept of the three metamorphoses on the spirit. Now, according to Nietzsche, in order to kind of solve the problem of personal identity in the modern age, whereby we are fragmented, cut off, alienated, not just from ourselves, but from even the project of having to become ourselves, because it's so easy to have identities ready-made for us, but they're not really authentic. They're sort of inauthentic identities because we don't choose them, right? They're sort of falsely laid out as possible choices before us. One has to undergo different stages of existence, each with individual types of behaviors and attitudes towards life that will allow one to reevaluate the values of modern culture that have shaped one's existence and values, and also to take a stand on those very values. And the first stage he calls the camel stage, okay? Now think about what a camel is. A camel it tends to be used for carrying loads, right? It's a load-carrying animal. And it always carries like the water, right? In the humps, what does it carry? All the water, the reserves that he needs to live, right? The thing about the camel is that it's the first stage everybody goes through. He says it's when we grow up, we grow up into culture so that we're camels. We learn to bear the burden of cultural values on our back in order to survive as a self. It's the water in our backs as the camel in order to make it through the desert. We carry the values of culture. We learn the language of our time and place. We go to school or don't go to school. We learn the values and social codes. We learn the habits and principles and options laid out before us, and we tend to stick to them. We even the freedoms, right? We bear the burden of the freedoms that have been laid before us as possible freedoms, in order just to be selves, to be individuals, rather than be seen as complete social outcasts, or just simply to be seen as members of society. We learn certain values and roles, and we carry them. That we carry the burden of those. So that's the stage that we're going to first talk about in the example. But suffice it to say that actually let's look at that. So this is the first stage, right? This is the camel stage. You just are. This is the narrator. His whole house is an identity of the camel stage. This is just the IKEA life. And you just pick things out from the catalog, the one size fits all, and you just bear the burden of culture. You walk in lockstep. You get the right job. You make a great income if you're great and you feel good about it. You have the right amount of kids. You think you vote for the right party. You are financially secure. All the different kinds of things that you think yield quote unquote human happiness. But as we know, there's a point at which there's going to be a crisis, right? And so the next, and most people, once again, can live and die at the camel stage and feel just fine, but that is inauthentic. Individuals seeking an authentic, or if you have a sense that something's profoundly not right, you're going to have to transition to the lion stage. These are sort of easy metaphors, right? Because what does a lion do? The lion roars, right? Unless it's prepackaged and pre-manufactured by like Katy Perry or something, and you think that's roaring. You roar the same. If you roar exactly the same as the next person into you, it's not roaring for Nietzsche, right? If you listen to songs about roaring or being brave, no, it's not the same for Nietzsche. So I think about the lion stage is that it fights alienation and moves towards the recovery of meaning, the question of meaning, having to make meaning for your life. By taking a stand on the kind of passive receptivity and the uncritical adoption of cultural values that you got to do if you're a camel, right? You know that there's something deeply unfulfilling about choosing your life from an IKEA catalog of shopping at the Gap or Banana Republic or the place or Abercrombie or getting a great sale at the mall, that it is not enough. That sometimes, and one of the ways that this shows up is you may get 100 on a test and you're not even deeply satisfied by that either. You're like, oh, okay, good. In other words, you experience it as relief. You don't experience that as joy, as feeling like a badass. You're just, it's a sense of relief sometimes. And so those are always of being passively receptive and uncritical towards the values of culture. And so the lion stage is a critical stage to restore wholeness to our lives. And wholeness here means integrating Dionysus and Apollo together, right? A whole complex human being that's multidimensional. And remember, the thing that, in many ways, what Nietzsche likes about this concept is that when you have one dimension and when you don't have, when you only have one way of being, that's going to yield one kind of personality. You don't have any sort of deep or dynamism. The thing about having roaring forces within you in an integrated fashion is that it's always going to create a wellspring for dynamism, right? You never know what your dreams are going to tell you. You never know what your subconscious or unconscious, the kind of creativity that can come from dream life, the way that it can inform a richer existence. So this stage restores wholeness by fighting for what has been undernourished or neglected or unfed or alienated by modern conformism and mass culture. It's going to fight for the things that are not getting tended to. It's going to fight for the Dionysian. Or if we have a culture that just is all Dionysus, it's going to fight for the Apollonian, right? If you're a student, certainly that's amongst friends or roommates or sorority or fraternity members, or teammates that are just partying all the time, there's a sense in which you're going to stand up and say, come on, like, let's get to work. But not for the purpose of simply getting to work, but because you may find something deeply passionately interesting about fields that you're studying jointly, or because you genuinely want to learn and you don't want to sort of waste your existence without the creative journeys that you can undertake in learning about different fields. So that's really hard to do. It requires great strength. Most of us live and die without ever having the strength to do that. It's a really hard thing to do. And so it's just like, I don't fault anybody for not being able to do it. But by the same token, that person cannot then go around and say, this is who I am, and devalue other identities who are taking the project. So at the lion stage, it requires great courage. He says, look, I needed you, Tyler Durden, because everybody else that don't have the courage that you have. It takes great courage. Sometimes it ends up in that, but this is how you roar. You say no in light of the authority of cultural values and assumptions about what is right, what is the right thing to do. But there's a problem, right? There's a problem to this stage. If you stay at the lion stage, this can create real problems and mayhem if you don't transition to the third stage. This is the hardest thing to remember and to do. You need what is the thing that the child cannot do that the what is the thing that the lion can't do that a child can do? This is critical, right? You need to move to the child stage. The lion, if just left a lion, right, top of the sort of totem pole in the animal kingdom, left a lion, all the lion's sort of predatory and domineering sort of instincts are going to come out. They're going to turn into sort of the cruel, domineering ruler. And the lions can be pretty sort of egoistic, right, in this sense. Egoism for Nietzsche does not mean that you're an authentic self, right? Going around and saying I a lot and saying I am a rebel, I don't value what culture values, doesn't mean you're a self. That can just mean you're just full of yourself, and you're hiding behind nonconformism as yet another prepackaged identity. And that doesn't require much strength. Remember, strength presupposes risk and vulnerability. You will be left vulnerable. You will be left. There's a sense of vulnerability, and the lion is at the top of the totem pole, right? They don't feel vulnerable the way that the camel does. So you got to go back to the beginning. You got to go back to the child, to the return, to the beginning. The child can still play in ways that require forgetfulness, right? That there's a willingness to forget in ways that the lion cannot, right? The lion is after feeding their drive. If the lion's hungry, the lion doesn't forget, that they're hungry in a naturalistic way, right? The child can recover a sense of play. The child can be on their way to do something and find something along the path that they get just awed and an incredible sense of wonder, and they're completely just sort of blown away by new ways of doing things or new discoveries that they hadn't thought about before. Nietzsche calls it a first wheel sometimes, the child. So the child is sort of this return to a willingness to a beginning, to a type of non-dogmatism, an openness, a wonder that means we don't stay at the dogmatism of the lion that's just cruelly domineering, walking about. And so this is represented in the film in a really, really good way. This is why it's a brilliant existential film, a Nietzschean film, because the thing about if you stay at the lion stage where you're just roaring and if you're just going against conventional values in the name of a project called Project Mayhem, you're going to lose individuality. Everybody has to wear black. Everybody walks in locksteps, right? The lion roars, but now you're roaring at another human being who's trying to become a self, an individual identity. You're not allowing them to become an identity. You want them to walk and sort of talk in lockstep and to dress the same and to have a standardized uniform identity that's no different than the consumer. Well, I mean, it's different, but in many ways that still resembles the conformism of consumer culture. You're still conforming to someone else's ideal of what is right, of a right way and a wrong way, right? This is a scene where in Project Mayhem, we do not have names except in death, right? Is that existentialist? No. For the existentialist, you have to work towards becoming a self, of having a name to call your own on this earth, in the here and now, not in an otherworldly realm, but in this one. So this scene is a rejection of existentialism, right? Project Mayhem is rejecting the existentialist project because it turns into just another form of conformism where everybody walks and talks in lockstep while releasing a sort of need to counterbalance the overly Apollonian existence of the narrator. And so this is why he sort of has to sort of shoot himself at the end to kill the lion at the lion stage. Um, so the key to the ending is seeing that the destruction, right, the destruction of conformism coincides with the destruction of the lion stage as well, the overcoming of the lion stage as well. This is a metaphoric representation as well, right? Because he has to kill by taking the gun, he has to kill Tyler Durden because Tyler Durden has become the ruling, domineering lion that's just after bloodthirsty destruction that's no different than the sort of original, um, the original sort of pressures of pre-pattern regularity of consumer culture. So the final stage of the metamorphosis is absolutely necessary. Becoming the child, a sense of wonder, a sense of trust, a willingness of forgetfulness about everything that's just transpired, a willingness um, to even have a strange sense of absurd hope, are all elements of the third stage of the metamorphosis. And it is in fact the only way on Ski's reading to fulfill the original charge of the movie, wherein the narrator says, if you wake up at a different time, in a different place, could you wake up as a different person? In other words, the question of personal identity, being a different kind of person, is going to require you to take a stand on that existence in ways that are represented in Fight Club as existentially, right? As existential methods. Through existential methods, one can take a stand on one's identity, but only in light of understanding the barriers towards such self-actualization in modern culture. So there you have it. That's Fight Club. So what are you going to do? You're going to participate in the discussion, and you're going to prepare for exam 4. I'll say it again and again and again. We designed these exams so that if you listen to this lecture as if you had come to a class that meets on campus, you take notes and you study the notes before you just sit down, you're going to be able to breeze right through the exam, right? If you don't study, you're not going to have enough time. You're going to have to spend the amount of time in looking up an answer that you will quickly run out of time and not be able to complete it. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this lecture, and hopefully it will prompt you to think about even some more existential elements in Fight Club that I haven't drawn upon or talked about, and to contribute to the discussion. Okay, see you next week.